Mike wasn't.
Are we on or?
Yeah, now we are.
Okay. Take two. Welcome to those online. I'm M.P.H. If I haven't met any of you, I'm Dean of the Larner College of Medicine. It's my pleasure for us to get together for this special keynote address as part of Professionalism Week. Up front, I want to acknowledge and thank Nathalie Feldman, who has chaired the planning committee this year, as well as all the members of the planning committee, which is populated with previous recipients of Professionalism Awards. And I can tell you that's a really highly professional planning committee. Events go on throughout the week. Up on the screens, I hope you've noticed already, starting yesterday and today, and then tomorrow, we're featuring students, both medical and graduate students, who were nominated for Professionalism Awards, staff today and tomorrow, or faculty today and tomorrow staff. I also want to please encourage you to attend at 3 o'clock here in the Sullivan classroom, the award ceremony for Professionalism 2024. We will follow that ceremony with a reception in the Hale Gallery to follow. Now, today's keynote address emanates from a really special meeting event that took place last year. The Larner College of Medicine, out of over 30 medical schools that applied, was one of 8 medical schools chosen to participate in the 2023 Millennium Conference hosted by the Carl J. Shapiro Institute for Education and Research at the Harvard Medical School and Beth Israel Deaconess Medical Center. This conference provides opportunities for collaboration on medical education projects, brainstorming ideas, and the possible publication of a consensus statement with the participating schools all participating as authors. This biennial conference is a unique opportunity for multi-institutional collaboration on important topics in medical education that include the continuum of medical education, simulation in education, critical thinking, and high-value care. The theme of this event was Professional Identity Formation, Evolving Concepts of Professionalism for Physicians in a World with Pandemics and Social and Political Upheaval. Quite a topic. Now, we had the opportunity to send 5 representatives to this important conference, in addition to the 3 that I'll be introducing in a moment, who are presenting today. Isaac Delabrere, I hope I said that right, Isaac. Medical class of 2023, an alum and psychiatry resident at Boston University Medical Center, and Tim Lahey, professor of medicine and director of medical ethics at the UVM Medical Center. Those presenting today are, as already mentioned, Nathalie Feldman, associate professor in the Department of Obstetrics, Gynecology, and Reproductive Sciences, and director of the Learning Environment for LCOM. Karen George, associate professor of Obstetrics, Gynecology, and Reproductive Sciences, associate dean for students at LCOM. And finally, Melissa Davidson, professor of anesthesiology, associate dean for graduate medical education in the college, and designated institutional officer, or DIO, for the UVM Medical Center residency and fellowship programs. She is co-chair of the Learning Environment and Professionalism Committee, or the LEAP Committee, along with her other co-chair, Dr. Nathalie Feldman. I've been looking forward to hearing more about this conference. This is an exciting opportunity for our college to have participated in this. And the more we think about professionalism, the more perhaps we can get it right, as well as emphasize the importance in medicine and biomedical science. So with that, please join me in welcoming Drs. Feldman, George, and Melissa Davidson as they give this important keynote address.
Hello, everyone. Thank you very much, Dean Page, for inviting us to present on this important topic. And thank you all for coming, those of you who are joining as well on Zoom. We are honored to be here to help to share with you the work that we've been doing in this area, and hope you leave today with some ideas to ponder on how we as a community can continue to build on the momentum inspired by Dean Page and LCOM's focus on professionalism. So you already acknowledged our team of Dr. Tim Lahey and Isaac de la Bruyere. Dr. Lahey couldn't make it today, but was instrumental in helping us prepare for today's session. Now I'll turn it over to my friend and colleague, Dr. Karen George, to get us started.
Thanks, Nathalie. Thanks for joining us. Can you hear me okay? Okay. Better? Is that better? Good.
Yes.
Thank you. Okay. So I am going to tell you a little bit about the origins of our work with the Millennium Conference on Medical Professionalism. We're going to talk about how professionalism is defined here at Larner. We're going to spend a good deal of time talking about the difference between professionalism and professional identity formation, and also consider the impact of the learning environment on professionalism and professional identity formation. And then hopefully have a chance to really explore some opportunities to support positive professional identity formation at LCOM and at M.H.P.E. So you heard a little bit about the Millennium Conference, what it's about, and the sponsoring institution. We were really excited when we read the request for application. Nathalie came into my office and showed it to me, and we thought about all the great things that we're doing here at Larner, our professionalism statement, our PCR groups, our LEAP committee, and all of the work that we're doing. And we wanted to be able to share that with other institutions. And so we got the group together. We spent a lot of time sort of going through the application and what we were going to be able to present. And we were really pleased with the way the application came out. And we were so honored that Dean Page was able to give us his endorsement and support us in attendance. And as you heard, we were one of these 8 esteemed institutions who were selected out of 30 possible entries, out of over 30, I think it was. So we were really excited to be part of this group. So the group met a year ago. It was actually a year ago last week at Babson College, just outside of Boston. And prior to the meeting, there was a Delphi study that helped to meet one of the meeting's goals, which was to create a consensus statement of what professionalism really is. We all talk about it. Sometimes it feels really abstract. And so they wanted us to, as the major goal of the meeting, walk away with a consensus statement of what professionalism means. And so the sponsoring institution did a very robust literature search and came up with a list of all of the elements of professionalism that they discovered in the literature and they felt to be important. And then they sent us this list in this Delphi study. So a Delphi, in case you're not aware, is a formalized systematic consensus to engage everybody who's participating and get their input. And so round 1 was this list of the items that they had compiled. And then we were able to choose the items as being either essential to this definition, important to this definition, or not important. And they decided ahead of time that consensus would mean greater than 70% of participants identifying it as essential. So we did that. We did round 1, and then we did round 2. And then what makes it a modified Delphi is that we did round 3 in person. And this was a really important piece to be able to come together. And believe it or not, we spent really 5 days kind of hashing out all of these nuances and contextualizations and things like that. And we're going to share with you some of this work and let you kind of weigh in on your opinions as we move on in this talk. But wanted to just sort of highlight some of the lessons learned, some of the aha moments that we had. I think the most important for many of us as we reflected was that professionalism is not the same as professional identity formation. They are very different processes and need different layers of support and scaffolding to make them work. The pedagogy to support professionalism and professional identity are very different. It is important to articulate professionalism expectations beginning the first day of medical school. We also came to the conclusion that this professional identity formation really needs to be cultivated over time with intentionality, and requires a lot of extra support. So coaching and time and space to do this important work. It is important to assess professionalism. It is really not desirable to assess professional identity formation. In fact, it's probably impossible to do so. Professional identity formation is self-directed. It's very much influenced by the learning environment. And there are ways that it can be enhanced. And one of those ways is a portfolio for students to be able to think about the experiences that they have and reflect on them. The learning environment, as you all know, is very important in this cultivation. And then something to kind of think about is this early on, and continuous engagement with patients and families. So as soon as possible, getting students to interact with our constituents that include patients and families. So those were the things that we walked away with. I'm going to turn it back over to Nathalie to talk about the history of professionalism.
And this will be very brief, but I think exploring the history of professionalism is important to sort of understand how the focus on professionals first came to be. And it originated essentially in the late 1990s as a response to the corporatization of America. It was key in helping medicine reestablish its values as an ethics-based altruistic profession, especially as that corporatization of medicine was evolving. And at first, that definition was really a lofty standard of behavior to reflect that ethics-based altruistic profession. But in keeping with a desire to really focus on professionalism came accrediting bodies to assess professionalism. And that became challenging because how do you really assess, and that comes to the difference between professionalism and professional identity formation, the values basis of the profession from actual behaviors that can be assessed in a particular setting. So what began to happen is professionalism morphed into sort of a list of do's and don'ts that often referenced things that really weren't necessarily values-based, but more appearance-based or superficial attributes that was especially harmful for those who fell outside of the historical stereotype of what a doctor looks like or behaves like. And so whereas professional really was very vague and difficult to sort of assess, being unprofessional had the same challenges, really in the eye of the beholder to be able to determine behaviors that were unprofessional versus professional. So that led to a potential of really using that term professionalism to hinder diversity of thought and be less accepting of cultural values and behaviors, especially in an increasingly diverse student and resident population of the beliefs of others. On the other hand, our professionalism statement, I think, really is a wonderful example of a definition that gets back to that fundamental notion of a set of universal values. So aspects like kindness, respect, cultural humility. Those are really what we as a community made the conscious decision to state what professionalism was about to us here. and how we manifest those behaviors through integrity, accountability, compassion, and altruism, social responsibility. So let's take a minute now just to reflect on our own professionalism statement. And we're going to provide you with a list of a few of the behaviors and values that were gathered at the Millennium Conference, that were gathered from the literature primarily. And we'll do a little experiment to ask you. So here first, a little instructions. Is if you haven't already done so, there's a web address there, ttpoll with 2Ls.com. If you can pull out, and folks at home, you can participate in this as well, or on Zoom, is to plug that into your browser with a session ID number is listed there, 527306, if you can't see it on Zoom. And there should be a list, a lettered list of 10 options, A through J, that you can select as many of the behaviors. And again, this is from a list, a long list of published behaviors and values on professionalism, to select the ones that you feel are essential to professionalism. And fingers crossed this technology works. Let us know if you have any issues with logging on. You don't need to fill in your name. You can skip that part. Unless you've already done so, it's not a problem. They'll be reported anonymously. So you are engaging now in a little mini version of what we did for those 5 days at that Millennium Conference. Okay, really reflecting on what are the essential elements when we talk about profession. Yeah. I don't know that you need it. It looks like we have about 18 responses. Yep, so I think, has everybody had a chance to do that? Thumbs up? Okay. Looks like we have, yeah, quite a few responses. Okay, well, let's see what the results show. Wow. Very interesting. Can you all see that now? Okay, so let me share the results with you. So again, if we, Bruce, I'm not sure how to show both with the list. To be able to compare to the elements. The top contenders were speak honestly with patients at 15%, demonstrate cultural humility at 14%, demonstrate respect, 14%, and be accountable at 13%. Okay, very interesting. Thank you for participating in that poll. And we'll see, how does that relate to the presentation here, to the Millennium Conference consensus. So interestingly, pretty similar in terms of what surfaced to the top and reached the essential threshold for over 70% of individuals selecting that. Speak honestly with patients, demonstrate respect, be accountable, and demonstrate cultural humility. So very aligned, really, when you think about what reached the top here in our small poll with the results of the Millennium Conference consensus statement. And we just listed a few of the others that were felt to be important or that did not reach consensus from the participants at the Millennium Conference. So let's take that abstract sort of concept of looking at professionalism and apply it to an actual case. And for this next activity, if we could ask you to pair up, or if it's more convenient to be groups of 3, that's fine too. And we'll read you this stem or a case to think about the answers to the questions that follow. So I'll read it out loud, but you can read it yourselves again or reread it. We'll keep the slide up. Ben is a third-year medical student with a strong interest in social medicine and infectious diseases. He was troubled to hear his infectious disease attending misgender a patient. He suspected the error was inadvertent and was not certain he heard correctly. He wondered if his rotation evaluation would suffer if he spoke up, so he did not. Mulling the decision over later, though, Ben took to social media to indicate his dismay at the attending's behavior, naming the attending directly. Replies on social media castigated the attending, sometimes using offensive language. The student was very upset by this reaction. So if you could just pair up and think a little bit about the response to, was Ben's behavior unprofessional? And if you were Ben's dean or faculty advisor or mentor, how might you approach this situation? And as medical educators and or peers, is there anything we can do to help prevent occurrences like this in the future? And how might the way in which this conflict was addressed best support Ben's professional identity formation? So we'll give you just a few minutes to talk about this case, and then we will ask for volunteers to perhaps share their rates. What am I going to do? Have your slide from the number. Tell me when you think we've given them enough time.
Just checking to see how you're all doing. We hear great conversations going on, which is wonderful, but just wondered if you're ready to share.
Great. And those of you on Zoom, we apologize for the fact that that was probably not that easy to navigate on Zoom. But if you feel like any comments that you want to place in the chat, please feel free to do so, and we'll monitor that as well. Okay, anyone want to share sort of any responses to the questions? First of all, was this behavior unprofessional? What do folks think?
We thought it was. Yes.
Okay.
Is that, do you want to comment on that, John? Or,
We thought it was, we just all agreed, we thought it was unprofessional, and especially in light that it was perhaps inadvertent, and he wasn't actually sure that he actually even heard correctly. So just at that point, it seems like going onto social media to kind of out someone or humiliate them in that way was probably not, would be very unprofessional, in our humble opinion, I think, and speaking for our group here. So leave it at that.
okay, thank you for sharing. Any other thoughts on that? Seems pretty much everyone's in agreement.
Did anybody disagree that it's unprofessional?
Well, I think there's different ways to look at it based on the added elements. So I think we were talking about how.
Thank you. If certain elements had been left off, it would have made it less concerning, right? So by naming the attending directly, you've just elevated it to a more significant issue.
Thank you.
Could, if he had just been inquiring, like, how do people feel about this without sort of giving a scenario or naming somebody, then maybe it's just inquiry rather than unprofessional behavior.
Thank you. Other thoughts?
No,
Yeah.
Thank you. Everyone felt it was unprofessional behavior, but interesting, at different generations, we might have thought it was at a different level. And the generational component of how we might address things, whether it's interpersonal, for those of us before the days of social media, was how really, I think, we felt probably it would have been best handled. And then we also addressed that there might be power relations here, and that might dissuade someone from addressing it personally. But a good suggestion was going to a mentor that might be able to help you interface or approach it.
Well, thank you. That's a perfect segue to the next question. Thank you very much for sharing those great reflections. If you were that mentor or advisor for Ben, how might you address this behavior with him? Any thoughts surface on that? We can collapse that with the third question about, are there ways to prevent that? Yeah, Liz.
One of the things that we talked about was, what are we trying to prevent? Are we trying to prevent Ben from outing and attending by name on the social media, or are we trying to prevent the attending from using potentially the incorrect or misgendering the patient? So that was something that we sort of had a conversation about in our group. So, not necessarily about how to prevent it, but which one were we trying to prevent?
Right. And maybe addressing it would prevent both in the long run, right? And so that's the interesting way to think about these issues, is the professional identity formation, not only of the trainee, but also of the attending at the center of that conflict, right? There's thoughts? Liz?
mean, I think one way to think about it is a systems issue, that it's not really reasonable to expect a student to, speak up when there is that power dynamic. And so coming up with a way that you can provide feedback in the moment, which, I think here at least does exist, but so you can get feedback, and I think this is where humility comes in, like all of us understanding that, we can always do better, we can always learn more. And so, if that is emphasized as part of the culture, then getting that feedback it's going to be easier to give and easier to receive.
Yeah, thank you very much.
One thing that kind of comes to mind is, are we like training students how to handle uncomfortable situations in a respectful and professional way? And is like that something that needs to be added to the curriculum so that they have those skills to handle something like this?
Thank you. Such great reflections. Thank you for sharing. Did you, that group wanted to? Yeah, I saw,
One that I was wondering, curious about, could it be posed as a question? As a question, maybe in the moment, like, oh, how do we correctly identify our patient so I can know how to do it properly in the system?
A spirit of inquiry. Love that. Great. Well, that segues nicely into sort of the next section. Thank you for sharing those wonderful reflections of the way in which conflict is addressed to help support professional identity formation. And we'll turn it over to Dr. Davidson to talk a little bit about that next. I'll get the slides up for you. Let's see. There we go.
So, as Nathalie said, or I think it was Karen at the beginning, that professionalism and professional identity formation are not the same thing. They're intricately intertwined, but they're not the same thing. So professionalism, there's not a great definition of professionalism, and there hasn't been up until this point. The one that we tend to use, or we've been using in the Millennium Conference, is this one from the Royal College of Physicians of London. And that's a set of values, behaviors, and relationships that underpins the trust that the public has with doctors. It's a little interesting. I'm not sure I completely understand it. It's still a little bit soft. And the reality is the definition of professionalism is still really not well defined. But professionalism tends to be behavior-based. It's about doing. It's what Nathalie was talking about. It's what we see. We can't see the values inside someone, so all we have is the outward appearance, what they do. I tell the residents all the time, when we evaluate you, I don't know what's inside. I can only report on it and assess what I see, okay? Whereas professional identity formation, this is from the Cruise article, the doctor's cruise. It's a husband and wife team. They're probably in their mid to late 70s now, maybe even early 80s. They're Canadian, aren't they? They're Canadian. And we love our Canadians. But they've spent probably the past 20 years thinking about and talking about and writing about professional identity formation. Really, the concepts go back to the 1950s, but they really took this on in terms of medical education and identity formation in medicine. And professional identity formation is defined as a journey of professional development and social construction, the process of enculturation, the actions, interactions, values, and norms of the medical profession. I identify this so much better than I identify with this unusual definition of professionalism. And it's really value-based, it's over time, it's about not just doing, it's about becoming. And that's exactly what professional identity formation is over time. We go from doing to becoming a physician. Self-directed process, acquiring core values that drive our behaviors as one's sense of professional self develops. And as Nathalie said, it is enhanced by the learning environment and very much so our role models. That's the socialization piece. Okay, so I'm a very visual person. So when we think about the core competencies, so the core competencies came about in the late 90s which aligns very much with this concept of professionalism. Oh yeah, that's when it all started coming to fruition, when the trust that the public had in our physicians was actually going down. They demanded more accountability. And so the ACGME took on this project called the Core Competencies Project, and those core competencies were rolled out in 2001. So I think that I calculated back of the envelope that you had to be born prior to 1977 to have trained before there were core competencies. Do you dare raise your hand if you were born before 1977? There you go. So there are some of us in the room. So back in the days when we trained, we didn't have these things. We didn't have this concept of professionalism. As a matter of fact, professionalism was never discussed in our training. At least it wasn't in mine. And so it was really wonderful that it was incorporated firmly into medical training, medical education. But sometimes we throw the baby out with the bathwater. What happened is these 6 core competencies were very much siloed, and they still to this day are a bit siloed, because even in ACGME right now, you know, we have these requirements that when we are training our residents and fellows, and actually the LCME has adopted the core competencies as well. On the way in the barn door, we have to write our goals and objectives in the core competencies, so they're split out. And on the way out of the barn door, evaluation tools, we assess in the core competencies. So we further sort of promote this notion that these are separate and distinct entities. So I tend to think about it a little bit differently. When I think about our core competencies here, right? Those core competencies, they're in little bubbles. And again, in terms of the assessment piece of it, it's really hard. It's purple there because professionalism, purple there, okay? But in terms of assessing professionalism, you know, when we assess, they tend to be very discrete. It's in course clerkship rotation evaluations, and very, as we said, very heavily reliant on observable behaviors, which tends to be very absolute. You're unprofessional or you're professional, right? Professionalism, know it when I see it, or more so unprofessionalism, that one I think I know when I see it. So that tendency to exist in absolutes makes it very difficult because it doesn't take into account any context. There are some things that are very absolute. We know what those no-fly zone norms, the zero tolerance behavior, but so many of these other things, they don't fall in that realm. So if we have a resident or students that's very late to didactics, and we tell them it's a measure of professionalism for you to show up on time, what is the context? Do they just show up late because they're late and they don't care? Or is it because they were in the emergency room taking care of a patient who really needs them, and they're counting on the resident to actually take care of the patient? There's 2 different things. So context becomes so very important. And that's where it sometimes gets really hard, like to separate these 2 things. So we go back to my bubbles of professionalism. I don't see these bubbles anymore as being separate and distinct. I see them all melding together, where here, all these different bubbles in these different core competencies, we train in these elements, but where it all comes together is right here. And that right there, that melding together, that's what we call professional socialization, right? Socialization, the process by which a person learns to function within a group by internalizing its norms and values. And so when this coalescing of all these core competencies, that's where we have the melding of knowledge, skills, attitudes, and internalizing the behaviors and the values to have this altered sense of self. This is where we start going from the doing to the becoming of a physician. I became an anesthesiologist, and Andy became an orthopedic surgeon. And that's where all these core competencies, they come together. They start making sense in terms of me being a doctor and not just doing things. And of course, the learning environment, this is all within that backdrop of the learning environment, right? Because that learning environment is so critical in the development of our professional identity formation and how we help our students, our learners, our residents become physicians. And the learning environment is a little bit, you can almost hardly see it, right? Because it's always there in the backdrop. all right? But we can be very intentional. We must be very intentional in how we ensure that our learning environment is conducive to that professional socialization of our students. For me, it's not forgetting when I walk into an operating room that there's a person standing there that I've never met. And I actually think, once more, again, be very intentional. I've lost this through 30 years and it's back again. Make eye contact, say, hi, how are you? Who are you? What's your name? Where are you from? What do you want to learn today? I've sort of forgotten that through the years and it's back. I can say that it's back. And it's just so important in terms of making sure that our students and our learners feel included in the community of practice that we have. So how do we do that at LCOM? Because we recognize that values evolve. We recognize people's progress through their changes and leading to professional identity. It's unique to each person. We said we can't necessarily evaluate it. We shouldn't be evaluating it, but we need to support it. What do we do at LCOM? Well, we start with PCR, Professionalism, Communication, Reflection course, which starts very early, right? Very early in medical school, with a lot of self-directed reflection and a huge amount of mentorship. I had this conversation with our psychiatry department this morning, and we had a professional development session then. And in that Millennium Conference picture, I showed Isaac de la Bruyere. He's a psychiatrist. And I said, somebody in this room made him feel like a part of their community of learning, their community, their professional community. And one person stepped and said, I think that was me, right? So that was really, it was like, yes, it really was. He started feeling like a psychiatrist that day that you started having that professional relationship together. It was so impactful for him. We acknowledge, identify, and recognize role models of professionalism, and Nathalie's going to talk about that a little bit. We approach concerning behaviors with a spirit of inquiry while also assuring accountability, right? We have a cup of coffee conversations. Nathalie will do that. And we foster an inclusive, kind, and respectful learning environment. Those are our goals. That's our mission. So Nathalie's going to wrap
Talk
us
a
up.
little bit about the learning environment.
About the learning environment.
Thank you, Melissa. So because the learning environment, with its many components that are illustrated here on that slide, with the personal, what the individual brings into the learning environment, the organizational, sort of the curriculum, the policies, also very important in setting a tone. The social relationships, critical, as Melissa mentioned, the importance of role models, especially the virtual learning environment. So the accessibility of the software, for example, and the physical learning environment. So how inclusive is a space? What's on the walls? How accessible is the entrance to the building, for example? All that creates a context in which learners integrate their professional values. And because of that, and all these components that make up that context, it behooves us to create an environment that supports rather than subverts the acquisition of those values. So the learning environment must therefore also embody the values. They have to be aligned with the values we hope our trainees adopt in order for that process to take place in a supportive way. And one of those issues is assessing the learning environment, as Melissa alluded to. So how do we assess the learning environment? Well, there's several ways. There are national ways. So the ACGME has a learning environment through its questionnaires, as do we on the national level through the M.M.Sc, GQ, and Y2Q questionnaires. There are additional ways in which we here at the Larner College of Medicine assess the learning environment with that specific focus on professionalism in mind. One is an institution-wide reporting system that allows anyone to easily report on professional or otherwise concerning behaviors within the learning environment, but also provides anyone an opportunity to identify exemplars and role models of professionalism, understanding how critically important they are as role models to trainees who are learning the ropes of what it is to become a physician. They're easily accessed for our students. They're on the back of all their badges, that QR code. And we also have a biennial learning environment survey that we administer to students that is intended intentionally to sort of assess parts of the learning environment that aren't typically assessed in the GQ and the Y2Q. The way in which the learning environment, when issues do come up, are addressed are what we've chosen to adopt is a model that comes from the Vanderbilt Center for Professional and Patient Advocacy that's called the cup of coffee model. So this model, many of you may have heard of it, is a non-punitive, peer-to-peer associated model and very supportive model for the adjudication of non-egregious behaviors. It provides us with a structured opportunity for dialogue and reflective practice and the cultivation of a self-awareness in a safe space. So again, it's not intended to be punitive. The goal is really to come together with our ultimate goal of taking better care of patients by taking better care of each other. Some of the faculty resources that also exist to help support a positive learning environment to bring your attention to are on the Learning Environment website. Many of the resources listed here are specific for navigating challenges, such as the one we reviewed together in the case that we studied together. And many have been either cultivated or curated from outside resources, but also many have been created and authored by folks in our LCOM community, much in partnership with our students. And I see I'll just nod to Sophia, who is one of our great medical students on the LEAP committee, the Learning Environment and Professionalism Committee, and draw everyone's attention to Dr. Liz Hunt, who's the new Assistant Director of the Learning Environment here too. So many of these resources are published and included as a result of that collaboration with many folks. And so I just wanted to draw your attention to that. What about the future? So that's very exciting. I think we've given you a sort of a little example of, or a little summary of what was discussed at the Millennium Conference. That has led to a lot of research initiatives going forward that we're very excited about. Larner College of Medicine has been actually selected as a site for continued research in this area, specifically looking at generational differences. So that came up in your conversation, generational differences around looking at professionalism and professional identity formation and what's important in there. Dr. George and I are on that research. Be on the lookout for surveys and focus group invitations in the near future to participate in that research, as well as professionalism remediation. And Dr. Davidson is part of that research group through the other institutions noted at the Millennium Conference to really take a deeper dive into looking at those aspects of professionalism. So we're super excited about that. That leads to the potential to continue to build on LCOM's leadership in this domain and formalize that perhaps with the establishment of a center of excellence on professionalism and professional identity formation that could help support existing as well as new professionalism programs. Things that we've alluded to in our discussion, like coaching, mentorship, relationships that foster that kind of self-awareness and monitor that growth in professional identity. To operationalize programs to introduce longitudinal patient-family relationships, for example, and importantly, to track the assessment of professionalism, as well as the support of professional identity formation, track and report on the outcome of some of our initiatives. Are they working? Is it helping improve the learning environment and improve professionalism and support those of us who aspire to live by the principles that are so beautifully defined and outlined in our statement? So we'll stop there and just open it up for any questions in the few minutes we have left, and to thank you again for your attention and for your engagement. It was a small but hearty crowd. And thank you all for those on Zoom. We'll open it up to any questions now. Thoughts, reflections, questions?
May I ask, there was a loaded, it was a loaded question really, or comment in terms of that one case, and that it, or no, in terms of the Delphi, where dressing appropriately was seen as potentially a measure of professionalism. We all know this tracks back to define appropriately. Is it, you know, in cis male, white, Anglo
Mhm.
perspective, or is it more broad? Do you want to just comment on that and how that was handled? Because I think it is possible to be unprofessional in the way one shows up at rounds. You know, the one that we might all agree on is unkempt,
Mhm.
unshowered, and drunk. That's unprofessional. I think we could all say that. But beyond that, it's a slippery slope in terms of defining appearance and professionalism together.
And that's why it never made it to consensus, for exactly that reason. It probably was the single most contested item on our list, and it went on for days, right? And we went back and forth, and everyone had an opinion. I felt like I came up with the best statement, but they didn't agree. But it was basically shows up in dresses that in a manner that respects the dignity of self and others. Because that to me said, I'm not going to show up with a t-shirt that says Black lives don't matter, right? That does not respect the dignity of self and others. And yet, does it matter if how somebody's hair is, or whether they have makeup on, or what their sneakers look like? Is that what matters? No, that's not what we're talking about. But again, even that didn't make it to consensus. And I don't know that it's going to.
It didn't make it to consensus as essential, and yet it did as important.
Yeah.
So there is the nuance, right? And I think our statement, our policy has changed. Our LCOM policy around dress has changed to reflect more in keeping with what Melissa is talking about, which no longer is gendered. So our policy used to be very gendered in terms of what was appropriate for women and what was appropriate for men to wear. That's no longer there. It's really just focused on no messaging that is, harmful to any others, and then some safety requirements around the setting that you're entering into the hospital and things like that. So very, very much more of that rather than appearance that could be misconstrued as, culturally insensitive, for example. Other questions? That was a great question. Thank you, Dean Page.
We do have a question from Zoom. Can you explain what a center of excellence looks like?
Sure. Thank you for that question.
I think that,
What do we want it to look
yes, yes, reflecting back. We feel that we're doing excellent work here, and we'd love to be able to disseminate the work we're doing to others. And we want to be a model for other institutions that want to take on this challenge and this work. How does that look? I think we need to keep talking about it and discussing it. But I think that, we got a lot of feedback in our application that we were chosen because they feel that we are an exemplar in the things that we're doing. So how do we spread that? I think we probably need some money, maybe, and a dedication to the idea, and a group of experts sort of thinking about what that would look like. I don't know if you want to add any more, but those are the things that we sort of thought about.
And have been encouraged to do by outside colleagues.
Yeah. And I would throw it to the audience. Just throw out, what would it look like to you? A word, a sentence?
For the center?
Yeah.
nonprofit, I think it aligns with the learning environment
Mhm.
and with what Natalie's already
Mhm.
doing in that. It's sort of a division of that, or an arm.
We live the vision.
Sort of a division of that or an arm of that, a place you can go. You have a question, I have to write a difficult email.
Mhm.
Does this sound all right? Am I crossing a line here? Something like that, where you have a resource
Resources,
for
resource,
professional behavior.
resources. Great. Anybody else?
Super.
What might it look like to you?
That can help support professionalism and a healthy trajectory with identity formation. I want to be mindful of time too, because I see that it's right at 1 o'clock.
One more.
Maybe
Just
one more
It's
question.
not a
Yeah,
question, it's
John.
more of an observation.
Sure.
So when you put up your slide, when you talked about the Royal College of Physicians definition, I personally think that as opposed to the other definition, that there's a cultural difference. Because in the UK, doctors are gods. You do not question them. I mean, I haven't lived there for a few years, but generally what they said when, like, he didn't go in and suggest, can I try a different medication? Because I've seen it advertised on TV, like that never happens. So I think the trust element with the Royal College of Physicians is very important. That seems to be the core of their definition. And whereas the other definition is, I would call it more of an American definition in around the use of their like personal growth, those kind of traits. I think Britain is way behind the States in the sense of encouraging people to grow and understand and self-reflect. And it's coming from my limited time over there now. But I would say that having lived in the States about the same amount of time as I lived in the UK as an adult as well, that's just an observation on my part that might help with your work in terms of sort of delineating all the Royal College of Physicians has this position that we're not quite sure where it comes from. That in my humble opinion, that might be might shed some light on that.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Thank you.
John, for sharing that perspective. Well, thank you all again very, very much. And thank you, Dean Page, for this wonderful opportunity to share our work with you. And thank you for your engagement and your wonderful comments and questions. Have a great rest of your day.